Hello, everyone. It is 12:59, so I'll give people the rest of the minute here and just to log in, and then we'll get started shortly. But thank you for joining today's webinar. All right. Again, hello and welcome everyone to our first Michigan Higher Education Network webinar, The Truth About E-Cigarettes. Thank you all for joining today. My name is Louise Harder and I am the MyHen coordinator. I'm joined today by Elaine and Carolyn, both from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Tobacco Section, who will be presenting. And they'll present the material in a little bit, which I'm really excited about. But first, I want to share just a few housekeeping tips with everyone. So today's audio is through the webinar system. And if you're having problems with the computer audio, you can try calling in on the right-hand side of your screen, right below computer audio, just click phone call and you'll get all the information for that. I also have you all on mute just so that it doesn't disrupt the webinar in progress. So if you have any questions, feel free to include them in the question box. It is also on the right-hand side of your screen. And I will collect those throughout the entire webinar. And at the end, Carolyn and Elaine will help answer those. And if we don't have time, I will send it out into an email afterward. Lastly, after the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to the survey. Please copy and paste that link into a web browser to complete that so that we have good feedback for future webinars. And with that, I will turn it over for our presentation.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Elaine Lyon, and I'm joined, as Louise mentioned, by Carolyn Chaudhry, my colleague. And we thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk about the truth about electronic cigarettes, or e-cigarettes, or vape products. Next slide, please. These are some of the things that we hope to cover in today's presentation. Carolyn, in a few minutes, will actually appear on your webcam and will be show and demonstrate how these products are used. We are going to be talking about some public health consequences, safety and health concerns posed by these products. We're going to explain why young people are using e-cigarettes, describe the climate, the e-cigarette climate in Michigan, and also point you in the direction of a couple of e-cigarette related resources. Next slide. So here we have a picture of e-cigarettes, also known as vape products, hookahs, e-go, tanks. There are so many different names for these products. Some of the older style systems, the tanks and mods, appear on your far left there, while the newer ones are located in the middle, and on the far right you see that compact looking design. Disposable e-cigarettes have been around a while, but they're actually gaining some popularity again. As young people find that they're fairly easy to purchase, they're fairly low price, and so they're able to just dispose of them after one use, so to speak. These products are not safe, and there's been a lot of talk about how they're less harmful, but we like to say that even though they could be safer in terms of the number of chemicals that you see in these products as compared to combustible products, they are by no means safe. So we want to talk to you a little bit about what these products contain. Generally speaking, they all contain, for the most part, nicotine, which is the addictive substance that's found in all tobacco products for the most part. There might be a few that are considered non-nicotine products, but the way in which these products are sold and marketed, the labeling on these products is very misleading. So even if a company says that the product contains no nicotine, it is highly likely that it does. So nicotine is the addictive chemical. Also in these products, you'll find glycerin, which has to do with the taste that you find in the e-juice that's used in these products, or the pods, and we'll show you some of those examples in a few minutes. There are many, many, many flavorings on the market, about 15,000 at last count, many of which have names that are very appealing to young people, like Smurf, bubblegum, and many, many others. But the flavoring that is used in these products is glycerin. That helps to formulate the flavoring. And while we know that we can eat glycerin, it's found in many of our food products, it is not approved for inhalation. So glycerin is being inhaled when a person uses these products. Again, that is a major irritant to the lungs. The other thing that you're going to find in e-cigarettes or vape products is propylene glycol, which is similar to something you'd find in antifreeze. It's a solvent, and it helps to, I guess I would say, liquefy further the e-cigarette juice so that it can, what we call, be aerosolized and inhaled then by the user. Next slide, please. This shows the kind of the makings of how an e-cigarette works. So you saw in the previous slide that they all look very different, but essentially they operate in the same manner. So we mentioned that the user inhales aerosol containing nicotine, flavorings. We mentioned the propylene glycol and the glycerin. There is a heating coil in these devices too, a battery. So these devices have some things in them that obviously a cigarette doesn't have. For instance, the battery, the coil. And so what happens is the battery heats the coil heats up the contents of the juice, which includes those things we just talked about a minute ago, the nicotine, glycerin, and so on, turns it into something that the user can inhale. And that's the aerosol that you see when a user is actually using this product. One thing that you should be aware of is that with the battery and the heating coil, there are a lot of particles generated from that are very different than from what's used in a regular combustible product. So for instance, you find metals like nickel, cadmium, and those kinds of things, which the user is also inhaling as a result of taking in this aerosol. Next slide, please. We really like to say that, as I mentioned, it's not a vapor, it's an aerosol. Next slide. Because what we find is that with the vapor, you think about the tea kettle, and the tea kettle emits this water vapor. That is not what's happening in this e-cigarette. It is aerosol. And as you can see from this infographic right here from the CDC, these are some of the things that are found in that actual aerosol. So it does contain a lot of cancer-causing chemicals. It does contain a lot of organic compounds that will affect a person's lungs, heart, and other body parts. Often these contain nicotine. The aerosol contains nicotine. I mentioned the ultrafine particles and the heavy metals that you find from these products. The other thing, we talked about flavorings, but in particular, there's one type of flavoring called chemical, diacetyl, that is akin to a butter flavor. So years ago, there were a lot of people found in microwave popcorn factories who became very, very sickened, and they linked it to this chemical called diacetyl, which is found in many of the flavorings that are on the market, but often associated with butter flavorings. And diacetyl is a chemical that has been linked to serious lung disease, including something called bronchiolitis obliterans. It's similar to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, but this is irreversible lung damage. And so this is something we want to be aware of, that many of the flavorings that we're seeing on the market contain diacetyl. Also, cinnamon is another flavoring that is very characteristic in a lot of the flavors and is of great concern. Next slide. So the things you see here are just a few of the chemicals that are found in the e-cigarette aerosol. Things like what you'd find in nail polish remover, paint thinners, gasoline, tires. These, and I'm not naming them all, I mentioned the batteries a few minutes ago. So simply put, e-cigarettes contain many, many chemicals, many organic compounds, heavy metals, flavoring such as diacetyl and other things that are very, very harmful to the user. Next slide. E-cigarettes are not an approved U.S. Food and Drug Administration quit tobacco device. However, we have seen many of these products out there that are advertised falsely, using words such as safe, the health e-cigarette. And what we wanted to talk about, you've probably heard a lot of people say that they've been helpful to help certain people quit regular combustible products. While Carolyn and I know anecdotally that has been true for some people, they are not approved for tobacco cessation or quitting tobacco. In fact, what a lot of studies are showing is that these particular products depress quitting by about 30% and also lead to dual use. So if a person is using combustible products, they try to use the e-cigarette to quit the cigarettes, let's say, what often happens is they'll start to use the e-cigarette in addition to the cigarette. Next slide, please. And then these are some of the common myths that we have heard over the time that we've been working on this. Things like, it's just flavoring, or nicotine isn't that bad for me. My vape says it's nicotine free. I will not become addicted. It's just water vapor. I don't have an addictive personality. Just because I vape doesn't mean I'm going to smoke cigarettes. And all of these things are actually considered myths. And along with the little bubbles here about the common myths, you see some of the facts. We know it's not just flavoring. We know that most of the products contain nicotine. Nicotine most definitely is a highly addictive substance. It is it is aerosol, not water vapor. And the fact that somebody says they won't become addicted, many of these products in e-cigarettes, they contain nicotine salts, which is a different formulation than combustible cigarettes use. Nicotine salts allow the user to inhale a greater amount of nicotine. Thus, especially in young users, they're going to get addicted more quickly because of the brain development that's still going on. So addiction is most definitely an issue when we talk about e-cigarettes. I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn now to do some demonstration and show you some of the products that are newer on the market.
All right, so hi everyone. Next slide, please. And with the next slide, you all also get to see me. So this next part of the webinar, I'm going to go ahead and actually show you some of the devices that you can see on your screen, but we also thought it was going to be really important for you to be able to visually see them as well, and for me to show you just kind of how they would operate or work. I'm not going to use them, but just showing you how the devices itself look and how easy it is to be hidden within my hand. So the slide you see here is the Juul, and so we have one of the devices here as well. So it looks just like a USB, and they have this one part here that is the body or the charger. And so what happens is that the user would put the device here to charge it, and there is a little LED light, as Elaine had mentioned, you know, when the user would inhale, an LED light will come on. And then we also have some of the pods here with us as well to show you. So on the screen, you can see that a lot of the pods, they have little colorful caps on them, and the cap is actually going to designate the flavor. So as Elaine mentioned, there are over 15,000 flavor combinations. However, with Juul, they were limited to some of their flavors before, and so now there's a few other flavors that are out there that are only available as quote unquote counterfeit kind of ones that would fit into the Juul. So how it works is that the cap comes right off, and then you would insert the pod right on the top, and then this is what the device would look like as a user would have the pod inside. Something really important to remember is that one pod, so this one pod is equivalent to 1 pack of cigarettes worth of the nicotine. So one pod is 1 pack of cigarettes, and one pod usually lasts the consumer about 200 puffs, they say. However, there are a lot of challenges and competitions out there that will have youth and young adults, you know, trying to inhale as quickly as possible, doing hot box challenges, things like that. So the actual amount that people could inhale or take hits from would vary between the user. We do know, as I mentioned, that one pod is equivalent to about a pack of cigarettes for nicotine, and we do know that there are multiple pods being used per day by users. We have been doing some survey questions among some of our high schoolers here in Michigan, and we've seen that it's probably about 1 to 2 pods while they're in school, or there are some people who say we don't know how many pods I'm using because I'll go through what I have and then they'll share throughout the day. Next slide, please. So these are some of the disposable ones, as Elaine mentioned. Some of them are not as popular anymore because they kind of have more of a shape that looks like a combustible cigarette, and that's not something that a lot of our youth and young adults want. So as you see on the right-hand side, some of these are very small. They come in different flavors. Some of them are called hookah pens, lava pens. This one is a Star Buzz version of it. These are all disposable, which means that they're already kind of charged, and they'll only allow you to inhale as the amount of time that is left on the battery there, and then, you know, people will just throw them away. So lots of different ones, but just wanted to show you a couple here. And then we have the Mark 10, which is also one of the devices that were one of the first generation ones because it's actually the same size and it's a little bit heavier than a cigarette, but so that was another very popular one as well. Next slide, please. So the tank is another one of those devices that may be, you know, some of those first generation ones, second generation ones. This one is much heavier than the Juul and all the other devices that I'm going to be showing you today. This is an e-juice kind of cartridge tank, as they call it, the tank. So you actually need to load in your e-juice, whereas with the Juul, you actually have a pod that you just stick right on the top. So this one is much heavier, and it's thicker, so it's a little bit harder to disguise and hide. This one was very popular years ago when e-cigarettes kind of first came onto the market here in the US around 2010, 2011. Next slide, please. So I did talk about how the Juul is a pod-based system and the tank requires e-juice. So on your screen here, you can see on the right-hand side, these are what the actual new e-juices look like. Very colorful, lots of names that are very desirable versus on the left-hand side is what the e-juices used to look like. They were small. They kind of looked like eye drops and eyedroppers, and the flavors were not as desirable as you can see on the right-hand side: rainbow drop, pineapple splash, strawberry crisp. So the flavors go on and on, but this was just to showcase that differentiation of what the e-juice bottles right now do look like. Next slide. So this is the iShare, very, very similar to, very similar to what the Juul looked like. Again, it has the charging base that goes right into the laptop or any USB port, and then it has kind of a magnetic pull to it to keep it together. However, the difference between this one is that the you can either put a pod in or you can fill the pod yourself and then put that in as well. So Juul pods and also these other quote unquote counterfeit pods fit within this device. It's a little sleeker, the color is a little different, a little bit more textured. So another device that is popular, and again, in the name iShare, so it's kind of promoting you know, people to use these to share amongst their friends and their peers. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the pods and a few of these other kind of quote unquote counterfeit pods. So as you notice on the packaging, you know, the only thing that is on here, it says warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical, but then on the back, the only ingredients that they say is the propylene glycol, glycerin, a flavor, nicotine, and so, you know, obviously it does not list all of those cancer-causing chemicals and such, but, you know, you kind of get the gist that, you know, they do put the label on, but then they're not explaining what really is truly inside these pods. Next slide, please. All right, so I have a little mashup of some of these other ones here that are very popular right now. I have been onto several of our college campuses. I have been presenting to different groups, both staff and students, and I found that these ones are some of the popular ones. So this one, the UFO, as Elaine mentioned at the beginning, looks just like a compact. It's the first 2 cartridge e-cigarette, so actually both sides come off and they have invisible mouthpieces, and they kind of say you can mix and match your flavors, you can mix and match your substances. So this one, very popular with probably a lot of women because it looks like a compact, or it looks like a mirror that could be easily carried within a purse or within your clutch. And then the next one on the other end is our Soarin' Drop. These ones come in bright colors, bright green, bright yellow, bright blue, bright pink, so colors that are very similar to highlighters. And these ones are just a little different, where you load the e-juice and then you put that right back on the top, and then this is the mouthpiece here. So just another device that's out there from the Soarin' company that is popular amongst our young adults. The next one is the Soarin' Air. This one, very similar. Again, the top kind of comes off and you load the e-juice and then you would put that back on. This one to me looks just like a battery pack to charge up your phone. So again, a lot of designs that are meant to look like something different. The next device is called a Rolo badge. So again, now they're getting a little fancier and they're trying to start making it seem like, the nobility and honor of using this device. Again, the top just comes right off and then you put it right back on. And then this is what a lot of, we do see with our youth using these ones, and they come in a variety of colors as well. Next slide, please. So this is just also another one. This one is called the Nord Kit. It's a little bit heavier and it kind of has a nice shine, kind of an alligator-esque skin to it. These Smoke Tech ones are now trying to say that it's here for your protection, that we have a battery shut-off button, because all the other ones that I've showed you so far, they do not have an off switch. So that's causing a lot of issues with overheating of the devices, and then the juices are leaking onto those batteries, causing overheating and explosions of these devices. But this one says it's supposed to be for your protection. However, I have tried to see if it does turn on and off the device. Maybe I'm counting to 8 a little bit differently, but as of now, again, this device does not seem to really be there for your protection. And it is a little disappointing that, some of these companies are utilizing and profiting off of, the unfortunate events that happen with other people who use these devices. Next slide, please. So this is the Soarin' Edge. Again, very sleek. It comes with 2 battery packs that can go right on the edge, and then there's a mouthpiece that goes on top. So just another device that we wanted to show you here. They say that they have this child-proof lock button on the sides. However, we have tried to lock it and it does not lock. So another thing with safety that they try to put in there that doesn't really work as well as they say it should. Next slide, please. So this one is called the Miko Kit. It looks just like a little GoPro to me. This is what I think of. And, it's sleek. It fits in the palm of your hand. If I'm holding it here, putting it next to my face, you cannot even see the device. And we know that kids, put their hands to their face all the time. So it just coincidentally seems to fit between your thumb and your finger. So again, another device to kind of be on the lookout for. And it may look like something different, especially if they have the lanyard attached to it as well. So next slide, please. Okay, so these are just a few of kind of our remainders that we're showing that are very popular nowadays. These are the Mr. Vapor, and they actually look like a jewel, but they also look like that double-sided eraser that we used to use in school, one for pen, one for pencil. They come in a lot of different flavors as well, and they're very sleek and can be held in your hand and mistaken as something different. And then the Slim, to me, it looks just like a pen. So again, you have to be on the lookout for these items that are, you know, making it seem like something else that they're really not. Next slide, please. So this next one is the IQOS. We do have one of these devices, but not here with us today. This is the I Quit Ordinary Smoking. It's a heat not burn cigarette, which is really troubling because this device actually uses, they call them mini heat sticks. However, they are actual just mini cigarettes that go into the device, and there's a kind of blade at the bottom that heats up. So it heats up the cigarette so that you know, they say less smell, no ash, but it is just like a regular cigarette, but just mini. And the unfortunate thing about this device is that this kind of goes around our smoke-free air law, because in our smoke-free air law, it says we need to ignite and burn, and these are being heated. So something to be out on the lookout for. They used to not be sold here in the US. Now they are, so we might be seeing those enter you know, our market very soon here. Next slide, please. So I mentioned, you know, having these e-juices and then putting them into, you know, all of these different devices. And Elaine mentioned before about like all these juices as well. But what I want to let you know is that there are many other substances that can be used within these products. So the Monitoring the Future panel study shows that, you know, the use of marijuana or THC within these products has actually doubled between the 2017-2018 school year, and then actually 11% of you know, college students actually vaped marijuana in the last month, according to a 2018 study from that Monitoring the Future, and that 15% they said they vaped nicotine as well. So we're seeing a jump with both of those amongst our students. But then also something that's really important to remember is that when you vape marijuana in that THC form, those oils reach up to a 95% pure THC, which is that psychoactive component, and that could cause temporary psychosis. And if you're using a joint or a blunt, that only gives you 7% pure THC. So jumping from 7 to 95% is very big and something to be concerned about. Next slide, please. So just a few vaping marijuana concerns, since I know on a lot of college campuses that I've been to, they've always asked this question. We do know that smoke for marijuana does contain a lot of those same toxins, so also causing all of those issues that we, you know, briefly mentioned about lung and heart and other organ damage. 1 in 10 marijuana users will actually become addicted, and that is especially for people before the age of 18, that rises to 1 in 6. And we know that some of the effects of marijuana on the brain affect memory, learning, attention, decision-making, coordination, emotions, and reaction times. So the higher the content, the stronger the effects will be. Next slide, please. So just a few signs to be aware of, because again, when people use THC in the vape form, it's odorless, so you won't get that traditional marijuana smell from, let's say if you're just smoking a joint or blunt, that you will get no odor from when you use it in one of these e-cigarettes. So, you know, just the red or bloodshot eyes, delayed reaction time, poor coordination, as I mentioned before, anxiety, anxiousness, dizziness, some tremors, and then, you know, the attention is also going to be an issue. Next slide, please. So we also need to remember that THC in marijuana, it also has some mental health effects. So we know high doses can cause the disorientation, anxiety, and paranoia. The more likely the non-users, you will actually develop long-lasting mental health disorders, including schizophrenia. And then marijuana has also been linked to depression, anxiety, and suicide. And as I mentioned, you know, the higher potencies are actually being used more often, and then people who do have mental health conditions are actually more likely to use these products on a regular basis as well. Next slide, please. So just really briefly too, I want to let everyone know that there is such a thing as an overdose on cannabis or marijuana. A lot of people don't think that because it looks a lot different than other drugs that are used. It is called greening out, and some of the symptoms are listed here on the right-hand side. Increased heart rate, hallucinations, loss of body control, panic attacks, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, and seizures. So just a couple things here to point out to be on the lookout for an overdose, especially on our college campuses. We have been seeing a lot more students coming into a lot of the urgent care surrounding universities with some of these greening out symptoms. Next slide, please.
Okay, let's talk a little data for just a couple minutes here. This slide actually shows the adult current cigarette smoking rate compared to e-cigarette use, taken from the 2017 BRFSS, Behavioral Risk Factor Survey. The thing I point your attention to is that 18 to 24-year-old area where it's circled, if you will, and it compares the cigarette, which is the blue, compared to the right side, which is the e-cigarette use, is shown in purple. And so we want to make sure that you understand that within this age group, e-cigarette use is the highest in this age group, as you can see from the comparison with the other age groups that are shown on the slide. And likely that has something to do with the huge increase in middle and high school student use rates in e-cigarettes, which eventually, of course, are going to show up when they come to college in the 18 to 24-year-old age range. So sadly, a lot of the kids coming to your colleges are coming with an addiction to e-cigarettes. And this is a rising trend. We saw this in the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey. It's increasing, and so it is very likely that you're going to continue to see these increased rates of e-cigarette use within this age group on your college campus. Next slide. This is a little hard to read, but this basically shows some of the e-cigarette use rates among high school students in different counties in Michigan, and we compared 2018 to 2016. 2016 rates are shown in blue, and then the 2018 rates are shown in red. And you can see in every case, the red, which is the 2018 year, is much higher than what we're showing in 2016. So again, this is high school students, but the reason we're showing this is because we want to underscore the fact that a lot of these high school students are addicted, and they are coming to your college campuses, and they're going to have problems trying to quit. These are highly addictive products. We do have other counties available. This is just a small smattering of the counties. If you're looking for any information, we will be happy to provide that to you. Next slide, please. Again, just showing, I mentioned the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey. I mentioned that the rates are going up. As you can see, among high schoolers in 2019, we have 27.5% of high schoolers using e-cigs, which is up from 20.8% in 2018. Similarly, among the 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, the use of e-cigarettes has more than doubled since 2017. Next slide, please. And then we also wanted to show you that about 6.2 million US high school and middle school students are past 30-day users. So this is rather significant because while the use of other products is generally going down, like cigarettes, smokeless, hookah, that kind of thing, the rise in e-cigarettes has been rather dramatic, and it's also therefore pushing up the any tobacco product column that you see on the far left. So with the decrease in all these other products, tobacco products, we have seen some decreases in any tobacco product category, but that's being reversed because we have the dramatic increase in e-cigarette use, which is driving up the use of any tobacco product category. Next slide. We want to talk a little bit about the young adult brain, and this will certainly impact the students with whom you're working at the college level. We know the human brain matures really about 25, 26 years of age. So as these young people, including middle schoolers and even younger, are starting to use e-cigarettes, they're becoming addicted earlier and that means it's going to be harder for them to quit if they want to later on. The earlier you start because of the developing brain means that you likely will be addicted for life. And the data shows, as we mentioned earlier, that oftentimes e-cigarette users progress to combustible cigarettes. So sadly, by virtue of the fact that middle school and high school students are using these products and their brains are still developing, they are becoming addicted. They are having some issues with mood disorders, lower impulse control, some of the things that we also see associated with THC use. And these brains are still maturing really through the lives of college students if they're typically graduating at, let's say, age 22, 21, 23, something like that. Next slide, please. The rise in e-cigarette use has happened for three main reasons. We talked a little bit earlier about the flavors and the great diversity in the flavors. There has been a huge amount of tobacco industry marketing around these products, and then also the lack of regulation. They operate in still a pretty much unregulated environment as we talk here today. Next slide, please. So this slide will show you some of the many flavors that are out there. And we talked about flavorings, and this is one of the reasons young people certainly start to use these products. And they come in all kinds of yummy, wonderful flavorings. These, of course, are just a few. Oftentimes when I open a bottle of e-juice, similar to what Carolyn showed you a few minutes ago, the rainbow drops, they smell terrific. And you open them up and you almost feel like you could drink the e-cigarette juice. So they smell good, they taste great, and the marketing has just driven up the use of these products by the tobacco industry. Make no mistake, this is a tobacco industry thing. They target our youth. They have known that youth are one of their target markets for many years. As people stop using combustible products, we see that the industry is trying to fill the gap by introducing some of these new, wonderfully flavored, easy to conceal products. Next slide, please. So in 2018, the FDA actually proposed to restrict the sale of some flavored electronic cigarettes in stores, but they excluded mint and menthol. Actually, we have a further update. You may have heard that over the New Year's Christmas holiday, the FDA has also issued some new guidance around flavored e-cigarettes. While we don't have a lot of information yet, suffice it to say, the FDA is trying to take some steps to work with the flavored electronic cigarettes that are out there. But what we're finding is that generally speaking, when you talk about flavor bans, because there's so much pressure by the tobacco industry, often menthol and or mint is excluded from flavor bans. And that's because a lot of people use those flavors. So as you can see from the bottom bullet there, mint and menthol e-cigarette use rose dramatically among high schoolers in 2018. So mint and menthol are often used interchangeably. And so by not getting rid of mint and menthol, we are still going to continue to attract a number of young people to these products. Next slide, please. The products are very trendy too, and particularly with the old generation products, you can have wraps and sequins and jewels and all kinds of things attached to these products, so they can be very much customized. Next slide. And the advent of social media marketing has really changed the scope of how these products have been delivered to young people. So at any given time, there are massive numbers of Twitters or social media, Facebook posts, all Snapchat videos, all kinds of things that are out there where the industry has hired social media influencers, people who use these products to talk about how great they are. And as you can see from these depictions here, the models or the people that they engage to be these influencers are often very young, very attractive, and often involve celebrity endorsements as well. So social media has really changed how these products have received notoriety. Next slide. Targeted marketing is another way that these products are marketed. As we know with combustible products, many of these products have been prohibited from being on billboards, TV, radio advertising. Not so with e-cigarettes. They can be advertised pretty much anywhere. And as we mentioned a little bit ago, the use of very misleading language like healthy, safe, are also words that are used heavily by the industry to promote these products. Next slide, please. And this just shows a couple of the very colorful, beautiful ads that have been designed by Juul. Very young models again, messages like Mondays don't need to be hard that we often see that are particularly attractive to youth. Next slide. Then we have the lack of regulation as well. I mentioned TV, radio, billboard. You see these things all over the place. Point of sale, so if you walk into a retail environment, you'll often see them, as we do here in the picture on the right, positioned next to candy at eye level where young people can see them. And we know this has a dramatic influence on the number of young people who actually initiate use of these products. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the health concerns. Elaine has mentioned the first 2 points talking about dual use, meaning using combustible cigarettes and these e-cigarettes. And then she's also mentioned the flavorings. So we've known that the flavorings are linked to serious lung diseases, heart problems, skin disorders. So I won't go too much more into those health concerns, but something that I do want to mention is the primary, secondary, and tertiary aerosol exposure. So primary means that, let's say I'm using an e-cigarette, that would be the direct effects that I get. Secondary is if I use the e-cigarette and then I exhale, and Elaine sitting next to me would get those secondhand effects, very similar to secondhand smoke for cigarettes. Now, third-hand aerosol means that if I'm using the devices and, I exhale the aerosol, anything, all those particles in the aerosol cloud, would need to settle and stick. So kind of like you would, the way that with third-hand smoke for cigarette users, you can kind of smell it on their clothes, in their homes, and on any of the belongings. So third-hand means that it kind of settles and leaches onto any kind of item that's nearby. So the floor, the walls, the tables and chairs, your clothing, anything like that. And we do know that that third-hand exposure leaches on for a long time, and that it will be those chemicals and the toxins and the carcinogens will actually seep through and then affect someone, who was not even near someone who's using those products. Next slide, please. So just a few health concerns that were reported to the FDA. We have pneumonia, asthma, cardiovascular disease, skin disorders like contact dermatitis. So we're talking about a lot of these products having nickel in them. So that could cause a reaction on skin or on your mouth. Also knowing that a lot of the e-juices, if they do get in contact with skin, can cause irritation as well. Oral health concerns like mucosal lesions. There's also articles out there that talk about something called black fuzzy tongue, which means that the e-juices are being heated up at such a high temperature that it's actually burning the taste buds off of the users, so leaving the consumer to not be able to taste very well, but also leaving a discoloration on your tongue. Disorientation as well, seizure, and then unfortunately now death. Next slide, please. So we have our vape-related respiratory illness or injuries, also more commonly known as EVALI, which means e-cigarette vaping associated lung illness. So again, just by seeing that acronym spelled out, it doesn't necessarily mean we know exactly what is happening with this lung injury. Health officials are not yet sure whether or not it's one substance, a product, or a brand that is responsible for the outbreak. However, we do know that both THC-containing products and nicotine-containing products have been reported. We do know that vitamin E acetate has been also introduced into our reports that we're getting from the CDC to show that this is also a part of the substance that's used as a thickening agent in these devices have been linked to this lung injury as well. Please, next slide. So just some of the symptoms. I know it's very hard to kind of recognize this, this illness because a lot of the symptoms you see on your screen are very similar to a lot of flu symptoms. So, you know, not something that would really stand out for us right away. So, you know, we do have, you know, the CDC recommending to call poison control if you are, you know, exposed or you have these symptoms, to go see your a physician right away. Just something to keep in mind that these are some of the symptoms. However, you know, really knowing what the symptoms are and knowing that if someone is using the product within a certain time frame, then that could be considered this illness. Next slide, please. So before I jump into the safety concerns really quick, I do want to kind of give a little update about kind of what the number of these outbreaks are. So every Thursday, the CDC actually puts out an update about how many cases are being hospitalized across the country. We're about 2,500, a little bit more than 2,500 cases across the state. I believe we're up across the country, I'm sorry. And then I believe we're at about 55 deaths across the country. 58 actually across the country within 27 states. And then here in Michigan, we have had 2 deaths so far. And I believe our latest numbers about possible cases here in Michigan are now up to about 64. So just to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that Michigan is also included within this big outbreak. Some safety concerns really quickly. Here is an image of someone who was charging their device and it actually exploded on the middle console. There have been fires reported, charger danger, poisonings, hazardous waste and litter as well, because people are then throwing the devices, you know, outdoors, and then those nicotine and the carcinogens are seeping into our grounds. Next slide, please. So here's just an image really briefly I wanted to show. This is a scan of a 37-year-old man who was using the device, and actually how Elaine mentioned, you know, this is aerosol. When aerosol is overheated, it needs somewhere to go, it becomes pressurized, and in the middle of the screen you can see a cartridge that is lodged right by the vertebrae behind the mouth there if you kind of look right in the middle of the scan. So this user was using the device and it exploded in his mouth, and you know, the C1 vertebrae stopped that, that cartridge. Next slide, please. This is another image. I believe he was a 17-year-old boy. This was actually in the New England Journal of Medicine over the summer in the June edition. This device was what was used. He was driving in his vehicle, and again, the cartridge exploded in his mouth as he was using it. You can see here that he unfortunately lost some teeth, a cracked jaw. He was in a rural area, so he actually had to drive about an hour to get to the nearest urgent care or hospital. And the physicians who saw him said that it was comparable to a close-range gunshot wound. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass along this slide over to Elaine.
So we also have a lot of social concerns as it applies to e-cigarettes. We've done so much work to stem the rise of combustible use, but unfortunately, as we've mentioned, there is a tremendous rise in e-cigarette use, particularly among young people. So the industry is really playing out of its own playbook. These ads are back on TV. We see them everywhere. Schools are having major problems with kids using them in the high schools, middle schools, and so on. We've talked about the false health claims and using language that is clearly not correct, like safe and healthy. These products most definitely are aimed at youth. They're meant to be concealed. They're meant to taste good. They're meant to look cool. So we have a complete social norm reversal on our hands here. And the one picture that I laugh at every time, although it's just so sad, is the deer smoking ban that's in the upper left-hand corner, because as Carolyn mentioned earlier, e-cigarettes go around our smoke-free air law. They are not covered by our smoke-free air law. Next slide, please. In Michigan, we actually define e-cigarettes separately from tobacco products. At the federal level, the FDA, as we mentioned a while ago, classifies e-cigarettes as tobacco. They define e-cigarettes as tobacco products. However, past June here in Michigan, our legislature passed a couple of pieces of legislation, specifically Senate Bill 106, which defines e-cigarettes as alternative nicotine products and vapor products. So they're classified separately from tobacco, and this poses some pretty serious problems. Next slide, please. Sadly, because a lot of kids know tobacco products like combustibles are dangerous, and these e-cigarettes are not classified the same way, they're not defined as tobacco products, you know, a lot of you think, well, then they must be harmless. They're not tobacco products. It causes major confusion with our federal rules, which, as we've mentioned, define e-cigarettes as tobacco. We do not in Michigan. And so sadly, these products are not subject to the same measures that govern our other tobacco products here. For instance, they're not taxed. We've talked about the fact that they're not covered by the state smoke-free air law, and that they still appear all over the place on billboards, TV, radio, and so on. Next slide. So we did a little digging, and we found that as of about a couple weeks ago, the national data on tobacco-free colleges and universities shows that there are about almost 2,500 100% smoke-free campus sites across the nation. And of these, a little over 2,000 are 100% tobacco-free. That means including things like e-cigarettes and other tobacco products that aren't considered, that are considered a little bit different than being a smoke-free campus site. So a lot of campuses are now actually including the tobacco protections to personal vehicles on campus. So really what's happening is it becomes, our model really is to have college camp are 100% tobacco-free 24/7, all the time in every space. And that includes vaping marijuana as well, because we know that that is a huge problem, that a lot of college kids are vaping marijuana. A good policy can be found at the link that you see there at nosmoke.org at the bottom of the slide. We also have some model tobacco-free campus policy that, although it's really been designed for schools and local communities, with a little bit of a language change, could most definitely apply to college campuses. Next slide. So we really want to say that if you're working on policy at your college level, we want to see e-cigarettes, hookah, and marijuana included in model campus policy. It's also important to provide for some enforcement in the policy. We talk a little bit about the carrot and the stick. So the carrot is a policy where maybe if you see someone who is using tobacco on campus, you can say, hey, our policy is a tobacco-free campus. Here is a $5 off card to the local campus gift shop or whatever. The stick would involve, of course, putting in place some kind of enforcement by maybe campus security, perhaps a citation or a ticket. You could also do a hotline that's set up to accept complaints when people are found using tobacco on campus. Next slide. We also feel it's very important to make sure that at the beginning of putting together a tobacco-free college campus policy, you educate and obtain buy-in from campus populations right from the start. And that as you roll out the policy and you continue to enforce the policy, the education is done on an ongoing basis. So for instance, maybe once the policy is in effect, you would decide that you're going to put tobacco-free campus signs at particularly high density spots where maybe tobacco use has been observed a lot. Or maybe you put banners on your campus that welcome students to your tobacco-free campus. You highlight the policy in all kinds of student materials. We've even had people tell us that they're requiring students to click to accept policy terms in syllabi so that the student understands that these policies are in effect at their school. Next slide. Of course, we want you to spread the word by putting up signage, as we mentioned a minute ago, but also think about, health center boards, putting notices in student handbooks, making announcements at athletic events or public event programs, indicating the tobacco-free policy on your campus website, those kinds of things. So using the online resources creatively, educating, spreading the word are all things that you can do to really promote the policy. Next slide. We also, of course, talk about signage and having it in good locations. So like along all your borders, bathroom stalls maybe, along benches and places where people might hang out to use tobacco products. Having it on your policy on campus maps, table tents, sandwich boards at all bus locations, and of course inside buildings next to the door, as well as outside of buildings, so that people know you're not allowed to use tobacco products even in the out of doors. Next slide. We also have a recommendation that you could develop business cards. This does not look like one of them, but we actually have a template that you can use so that maybe you inform your campus security folks that if they find someone's using tobacco on the college campus, they could pass out one of these business-size cards, which on the left talks about why you're promoting a healthy and safe campus, why you're excluding all tobacco use from campus. And then on the flip side, there would be some resources to help the individual to quit if in fact they're interested. Next slide.
Okay, so really quickly, I'm going to go through our kind of last remaining slides since we are about 5 minutes left. So these are just some strategy that the Surgeon General listed out in his advisory, as Elaine said, including them in indoor policies, restricting access, licensing tobacco retailers, implementing policies, developing educational initiatives, curbing the marketing and reducing those flavors of the products. Next slide, please. So these are a lot of resources that you will be able to click once you do receive this PowerPoint. So I'm not going to go through these resources, but just know that there are some great links here that can help with tobacco-free campus policy guides and other states that have their universities that showed success. Next slide, please. So this is our website, michigan.gov/e-cigarettes. You can find great fact sheets, infographics. There's certain resources specifically for schools. We have updates on any of the bans and anything that is occurring in the future, especially with those outbreaks as well. Next slide, please. So we have just a couple resources that are available. This is called From the Truth Initiative. This is Quitting. It's a text-based program, or you can call. It's free to enroll. Just, another way that we can promote our youth to try to quit. We know kids are on their cell phones a lot, so this might be a great way to initiate, quitting amongst, our college students. Next slide, please. We also have our quit line here in Michigan, 1-800-784-8669. This actually is provided 24/7. Anyone can call in or text, and that could allow for resources for our students to be able to utilize, which is free. Next slide, please. So these are our contact information, our emails. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you may have from today. I know we're getting very short on time, so I will actually send it back to Louise to wrap it up.
Hi, yes, thank you. Wonderful presentation. And I see some people have already asked some things in the question. So with the remaining few minutes, if people want to type in questions into the question box, I'll start reading them. And if we don't have time to answer your question right now in the next few minutes, I will follow up and send it out in an email and have one of our two fabulous presenters answer it then. So the first one, if Juul pods contain 50 milligrams of nicotine, does that mean the user will get 50 milligrams if they smoke the entire pod?
It depends really on how deeply the person inhales. Everybody takes a breath differently and inhalation differently, but that would be like the capacity that they could get. So while we can't say definitively that every person would get the same amount, they certainly could get up to that.
All right. And is there a way for schools to properly dispose of the devices after they are confiscated?
Yeah, so that's a tricky question here too, because we have been talking with Eagle, who was formerly known as our DEQ. They are environmental specialists here in the state. And we do know that since half of the device is a battery and the other half has, you know, the nicotine, the substance, that we're thinking that they do need to be recycled separately. We will get back to you on that question, as we know that we are working closely with you know, our different departments on how to dispose. If you do have a lot of them, you can always give them to your local police departments, and then they can also then know how to, you know, properly dispose of those.
Great. And what is the age eligibility for My Life, My Quit?
Oh, great. Yeah. So here's like some people know about My Life, My Quit. So with My Life, My Quit, you have to be under the age of 18. So that's the kind of part here that might not be able to be as desirable for a lot of our students at the college level, just because we do have our quit line available for anybody, but we did specifically do the My Life, My Quit for those who are under the age of 18.
Sounds good. And I will share those slides afterwards, so you will have the resources and the quit lines and that information as well. Any last questions with 1 minute less than, we don't have a minute left. If anyone has any additional questions, please either email me or in that feedback section when it says additional comments, you can put them in there as well, and I will filter them out and add them to the response at the very end. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.